All right. We will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. Looks like we've got a really good crowd today. And so I appreciate that with everything we kind of put into this. So thanks for joining us for our ECU Alumni Coffee Hour. I'm so glad you've joined us, and I hope that you all are staying safe, healthy, and sane and well. First things first, I guess we'll start with our ground rules. As we started with our first of these virtual events, just kind of go over the format with you really quickly. I should first say that we're recording this session, so folks who couldn't be here can access it later. So please note that it will record our screens and the chats. Um, we'll mute everybody's line upon entry and keep them muted as we meet our featured guest, Dr. Liu. He's got a presentation and some information that he'll present first. Following that, we'll open the floor to questions from all of you. And as we go along, you can ask a question in the chat by clicking on the word bubble in the user menu on your screen. If you scroll your mouse across the main part of your screen there, a word bubble will come up. You can pose a question in the chat there as well. Once we get to audience Q&A, we can start to unmute and ask at that point, and hopefully it doesn't, we've got a lot of people in the room, so hopefully that'll be smooth. And again, I'm thankful in advance for your patience and understanding as we navigate the ins and outs of the technology we're working through. We're getting pretty good at it, but we're going to be switching whose screen you can see in the middle of this, so I just ask that you bear with me on that one. So let's meet our guest. Without question, COVID-19 is already taking a toll on markets, governments, and populations worldwide. Dr. Haiyong Liu is with us this afternoon for a discussion about what we can expect short-term and long-term from the economy in the era of the coronavirus. So I will introduce our special guest. Dr. Liu received his doctoral degree in economics from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2003. That's okay, we like him anyway. When he joined the faculty of East Carolina University, he is currently the chair and professor of economics. His research expertise is in areas of labor economics, health economics, and quantitative methods in economic analysis. Dr. Liu's research findings have been published in numerous leading economic journals, including International Economic Review, Journal of Econometrics, Journal of Development Economics, and Journal of Income Equality. The research led by Dr. Liu have received grants and contracts from various agencies, such as National Institutes of Health, FEMA, U.S. Army, and the USDA. So we thank the Thomas Harriot College of Arts and Sciences for lending him to us today. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Liu to have the floor, and let me make sure that you can all hear him.
Thank you, Scott, for organizing this workshop. This is Haiyong Liu, and be happy to share some thoughts with you about the impact of COVID-19 on the economy.
Perfect, go for it.
I think I'm going to share my screen. I added a few new slides. I hope you can see it. All right. I think when Scott asked me to lead a discussion about COVID-19 and economic impact, I've been working on a few projects that's related with COVID-19 in both public health and economic impact. I think most researchers in this field would agree that this is an unprecedented economic event that we have never seen before. Its uniqueness, its impact, its timing, it's probably one of the century event, like many people argued in various disciplines. So I think I'll start sharing some new data, up-to-date data about just snapshots of several different perspectives of the impact from this public health crisis. So I'll start with something that I'm more familiar with, the labor market. I think lots of people are also very interested about labor market. There are a couple unique aspects of the labor market and why it's important to the economy. Um, so for one, and labor market is the one of the engines to the economic growth, and also it will have the quickest response to economic event, economic shock, like what we're experiencing now. If you read the headlines, I think lately, I have one word to describe what's happening to labor market. It's shocking. Um, just put things in perspective. So the first slide I want to share with you is the surge of the initial jobless claims. You probably heard headlines starting from late March that which is the whole country has experienced a surge of jobless claim that going to the state labor department about unemployment insurance claims. And just put those numbers in perspective. Over the past 6 weeks, about 30 million Americans have filed for jobless claims. The high peak of a previous recession in 0809, the largest jump was only 800,000. In the US history, the largest weekly jobless claim, one number came to my mind is when we ended the war in 1945, about 2 million US military servicemen were demobilized. That was the last time we saw anything that remotely close to the magnitude we're experiencing in terms of people losing their jobs. One of the better news, I guess, if you look at this chart, is that the numbers, the weekly claims actually peaked in late March. Instead, started flattening out for various reasons. I'm probably going to come back later. So it seems like the labor market is calmer and returning to somewhat more stabilized state. So this is the long view of unemployment insurance weekly data. So went all the way back to the 60s. So you can see that all the shaded area are recessions. So we are used to observing jobless data at the peak of a recession, weekly claims hitting a million number mark. But you didn't see it wrong. At end of this chart, which is starting at end of late March, all the way up to last week, and we have seen this million mark in terms of a claim number. It just mind-boggling how large the scale is in terms of the hit on the labor market. So this is unemployment rate. We have enjoyed one of the longest streak of declining unemployment rate since the recession, the Great Recession. But that has changed almost in a month or so. So from the longest streak of declining unemployment, we lost all the jobs we have accumulated since the recovery of a Great Recession and some. So now we're hitting a bad mark in terms of the unemployment rate. So we're pushing towards 15%. As you can see, since the 50s, we have never experienced unemployment rate at this magnitude. 15% was really uh, from one of the lowest unemployment rates only less 2 months ago to one of the highest unemployment rates we're experiencing. The timing, the shock, the compression of the time is just unprecedented. Um, I think a second perspective I want to share with you. I think it's also understandable as we change our lifestyles since March, as the whole nation, the whole economy was put on somewhat a pause. And so you look no further than the crude oil. And you probably heard all the crazy market moves in the crude oil market a couple of weeks ago, that we have never seen a negative crude oil price in the futures market. And then we did now. And so there's a crashing in the crude oil market, and lately in March and April. We had a somewhat stabilization in the crude oil market in the past couple of weeks. As you can see, this is data all the way back to the dot-com bubble in the 2000. And the previous crashing of a crude oil market is 0809, the financial crisis. But again, we have never seen a crude oil market that was basically dropping out of the sky under the ground. And so it started a little bit of recovery, but we're nowhere near the historic normal level in terms of crude oil. So this is a reflection of many aspects of the economy, from the lack of travelers, the grounded flights, the slowdown of the manufacturing, or using crude oil as a fossil fuel. So this partially explains the plunging price for crude oil. So as of April, more than 100 countries in the globe have put in some level of travel restrictions because of the COVID-19. So you rarely see any kind of blank spots on this map, and there are a few places in Africa. That's about it. So people are basically change their lifestyle, change their mobility pattern, and everything is on hold. And that basically contribute to part of the plunging prices of crude oil, which is a very important commodity to global economy. And I grabbed this next couple of slides from a portal that provided by Google. So the Google is providing mobility data, and based on navigation, based on routing searches. So as of May 9th, 2020, last week, you can see that across the US, the traffic towards retail recreation has plummeted. And at the slowest day, which is April, and we're looking at a reduction of 70% of a traffic compared to the baseline pre-COVID-19. And so slowly we see more mobility on the street, but still right now we're 30% down in terms of the traffic to retail recreation across the nation. Here's a chart that basically using similar technology to measure the reduction of a mobility across the country by states. Again, across the board, we see a sudden reduction of mobility since late March. So on this map, the darker the color, the further the reduction. You can see one thing that's jumping up, is New York and then Washington, D.C. And so they are down in the range of 50% in terms of retail, recreation, mobility. This is a similar data source on the workplace traffic, again, across all 50 states and Washington, D.C. And we see a steady slowdown of the traffic to workplace since late March. Some states are kind of inching up. Some states are still pretty down. Again, a magnitude 60%, 50% are pretty common across the country. So again, people are not going to workplaces. People are not going to retail, recreation places to consume. People are not flying. And so here's the data from IATA, the international organization that has the best data of air travel. And there are several curves that coming from 2017, 18, 19, and then 2020. As you can see, and 2020 is such a special year in terms of air travel, and we're down greatly from the baseline flights just throughout the early part of 2020. Back to home, look at Pitt County. We are somewhat less muted in terms of the suppression of mobility. So compared to the baseline, which is a pre-COVID-19, and with the seasonal control, we're down 22% as of May 9th for retail recreation, which is an important metric of measuring the consumer's behavior involved in retail sales. At the peak of the stay-home order and then people's reduction in mobility, we are around 60% reduction in mobility. But since early April, it's creeping up in terms of mobility, almost to 20% level, which is probably one of the highest across the eastern seaboard. So another chart I want to share with you is the working from home during the COVID-19 public health crisis. And I want to show this slide. It has two pieces of information. Number one, and we see a surge in terms of a percentage of the workers working from home. But like many economic indicators, this is not evenly distributed among income groups. So I broke the income groups into 5 groups. So the very left is the bottom quintile, the bottom 20%. The very right is the top quintile. So as you can see, the dark blue indicates the percentage of people in those income groups were able to work from home. So the people who have the privilege to work from home often concentrated on the right-hand side, on the higher income quintile. So the highest quintile, the top 20% earners, they are close to 72% were able to work from home. In contrast, you look at the bottom quintile, less than 42% of the people were able to work from home. And actually, more people, which is the light blue, are the folks that couldn't work, and simply because they don't have the option for working from home. So two things from this slide. One is the impact is not evenly distributed on the income groups. Also, and it has a important implication in terms of like a long-term recovery from this shock. So as a result of the lack of mobility, change of consumer behavior, change of work behavior, So we see some direct metrics measuring the economic impact from the COVID-19. So one thing I usually think that everyone can feel is the people's consumption behavior. So last week, so we have the newest data coming out of the Commerce Department. And again, this is a data that goes all the way back to previous recession. And the U.S. retail sales plunged almost 16.4%, and with seasonal adjustment. Again, it's unprecedented. We have never seen retail numbers so bad, uh, even including the Great Recession. We haven't seen a slowdown of a retailing this drastic and this rapid. And again, if you look under the hood, the 16% are not evenly distributed. Some sectors are hit worse than others. So, for example, we see lack of consumption in sectors like clothing, electronic, furniture, and the grocery store actually are not too bad compared to other sectors. And the online shopping actually see a surge up 5.4%. So that's pretty understandable. And people cannot go out, and the next best thing is purchase online, having them delivered to your doorsteps. Okay, so across the globe, economists are crunching numbers and trying to figure out how bad this thing is going to be on the whole economy, and what's going to be the long-term recovery and going forward. Here are some forecasts provided by economists from several major investment banks, and many economists forecast at least in the magnitude of 4% hit to the GDP growth. And so the dotted line on those two charts are the trajectory of the economy without the COVID-19. So since the end of a fiscal year from 2019, and when the breakout of the COVID-19 occurred around the globe, and then we can see that the economic shock wave is spreading across the globe. And so many economists have a consensus about we might see the worst of the hit in the second quarter of 2020. So that's probably between 8% to 10% for US economy. And so if you annualize that number, and we're looking at between 4% to 6% annualized GDP growth damage from the COVID-19. But of course, that's basically is very much depending on how well we're going to control the spread of the COVID-19, how effective, how efficient, how safe we're going to reopen our economy. So as for the long-term recovery, and we are cautiously optimistic, but of course we need to rely on the data um, to make a better understanding the road to recovery. The Fed chair Powell gave an interview last night at CBS 60 Minutes. I think and one statement from his interview was pretty, I think was pretty on the mark. Is talking about without the vaccine, we might never get to talk about a 100% recovery, at least not in the short term. I think that's one of the um, I think that's one of the uh, most serious kind of assessment of our current situation. And um, I also have a few bright spots to share. So it's not all doom and gloom. Um, so, for example, it seems like people are coping with the unprecedented fiscal policy introduced by the Congress, and the US government was able to provide um, a tax refund to most American households. And we also have unprecedented rapid expansion of unemployment benefits by adding longer periods of time you can receive unemployment. Also provide the $600 on top of regular unemployment claims. Based on the economists from Brookings Institute, the fiscal policy provided by the US government was able to offset about 50% of the income loss due to the unemployment in April. And because of those unprecedented fiscal and monetary policy introduced by the Federal Reserve, the federal government, and the state governments, and we can see that a lot of people are still able to make their apartment rental payments, which means that they get to stay at their home. Um, and we also see there are increasing interest in online shopping. So the retail number is down, but and some online shopping, some online and consumption behavior are offsetting a little bit of the plummeting retail numbers. So we're not going to the physical store, and we are managing to kind of complete our purchases somewhere else, which could potentially present some opportunities for retail business thinking about moving online. Um, the March April job numbers are very bad, and but May seems to be flattening. It seems the initial hit to the labor market has softened, and we might be facing some sort of recovery in terms of initial shock on the labor market. Again, any economic indicators you look into more details, you see there's some uneven distribution. So the previous slide showed the jobless numbers across the spectrum of household income. This slide, I'm breaking down the households into different income levels. The lowest one is the purple one. It's the household income with 100K or above. The green line is about 50 to 100K. The purple line is households less than $50,000. As you can see, the starting from April 12th, when we had the biggest hit to the labor market, the surge of jobless claims. And in terms of a sheer percentage increases, the low income groups have the largest jump in terms of jobless claims. So it's more than 17% at its peak. But since then, since the first week, couple week of April, that number have stabilized, almost plateaued. But we cannot say the same for the purple line, which is the high income group. And they didn't suffer as much of a jump in terms of initial shock in April number. And so they are slightly above 7% in terms of 7% percentage point in terms of a jobless claim. But that hasn't slowed down like the low income groups. So they are still, more people are joining the unemployment part of the labor market as time went on, which means and the initial hit on the low income and middle income group may have hit its peak. Um, but the people from the occupations or from the sectors that with higher income are still feeling the fallout of the slowdown of the economy. And so we probably haven't not seen the worst yet in terms of uh, uh, this particular part of the workforce that facing the unemployment. So as a combined results, and if you just look at the average hourly earning of all employees, interestingly, the average hourly earnings actually are increasing since March. I think this is a combined effect of the people who are staying on their job are more likely to have a higher income, and also the initial shock in April to the labor market have wiped out of workers with part-time job and with low-income jobs, and so they are no longer captured in those data calculations. So what's remaining in the labor force are a smaller number of people with a high-paying job. So if you look at this statistic, it could be very misleading. That's showing it seems like American workers is actually making more money, but the, uh, there there are some more disturbing actually details behind those numbers. I think those are the slides I prepared. I think the message I want to share is we have basically been experiencing unprecedented liquid shock to the economy, and it's unprecedented in many regards. One, it's we just came back from a long recovery since the Great Recession. We have one of the longest streak of unemployment rate decline. We have one of the longest growth of the labor market, and all of a sudden, and it halted, and then we plunged into this temporary, hopefully a short-term downturn of the economy, um, a, quickly, rapidly decline of employment. We have an economy put on hold. We have people are not going to workplaces, are not spending in retail and recreation that like they used to. And so all of a sudden, we actually are experiencing maybe one of the biggest stress tests to our way of a life and our way of living and our economy. So you heard the stress tests that the financial authorities conduct on commercial banks. I think unwillingly unprepared that all of us are experiencing a stress test on our life, on our livelihood, on our community, and our economy. I think some of us are doing very well under the stress. Some, with various reasons, are not as prepared or as well situated. But the long-term impact remains to be seen as we are just started getting better quality data on very different aspects of this um, global event.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Dr. Liu. I'm going to switch this up here and go that way, and then stop sharing. Awesome. Well, that was a lot to take in, and at portions there, I was waiting for some good news in there, but quite a bit of information and data to process. And so, what I want to do now is open up the floor in a moment for questions. We got one through the chat that I'll ask you first, and that is, do we have any information on the impact of deaths on the Social Security trust solvency?
I think if you look at the impact and the magnitude, so we already introduced a 2 trillion physical rescue package to the Americans. And we're talking about another $3 trillion rescue package that might be on the way. So I think in contrast, and that we are now fully embracing this quick debt accumulation and its impact on every aspect of our physical health, and including the solvency of our Social Security. I think various policy proposals have been circulated in Congress, including a holiday for like a payroll holiday, and or change the temporary change of Social Security age, where people can start early withdrawal without penalty, and you can borrow against your Social Security. I'm not sure those policy will be passed, but I think people are realizing that the impact of this those rescue packages on the long-term health of our fiscal policy. But at this point, where we are in a survival mode as far as the fiscal and then monetary policy is concerned, because when people are not performing their economic activities as they used to, I think most people estimate that's 20% of the GDP for every month of a stay-at-home order, which means you can do the calculation. That's 20% of the U.S. GDP every day, every week, every month. And without those revenues that converted into tax revenue that go to the coffer, and I don't think anything is going to be sustainable. But fortunately, and we are talking about reopening, and hopefully that the we get a more confirmation from the public health experts that we can slowly reopen the economy. And so if it's a short-term impact, I'm not hugely worried because like many economic shocks in the past, and this shall pass. And I wouldn't say how quickly we're going to go back to normal, but it will go back to normal. And as you can see, um, uh, the the forecast provided by those investment banks are forecasting a recovery somewhere between the second quarter next year, and so we might go back to the trajectory we were on last year. And so if that's the case, maybe this will be unwind. We are able to unwind those 2 trillion, 3 trillion here and there slowly. But at this point, I think at least I haven't heard lots of the discussion in the Congress talking about the long-term impact just yet. But we will come to that point, that to have a better data and have a better idea. But as it stands now, I think we're talking about how we can prevent preventable death. We want to save every job that we can save. We want to save every home we can save. Yeah, but that's a good question. I just don't have the numbers to say one way or the other.
Right. Speaking of stimulus, we got a question that asks, wouldn't it be a better stimulus to give it to the people who need it and not everyone? They follow up and say, I have a job and have kept working, so feel like that $1,200, that initial $1,200, they didn't need it like others may have needed it more. So it is uh, would it be better to do it that way? Is it possible to do it that way?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I just saw a study. They conduct surveys on the households that receive the refund checks. So most Americans below in household income $150,000, they receive between $1,200 per person and or less. So that study basically tracked the spending pattern of the people on their refund checks. Um, Surprisingly, people are not spending on the refund checks on non-essential items. I think the majority of the people who are receiving the refund check are spending them on rental, on groceries, on medicine, and also shockingly, um, I think around 40% of the households spend 50% of the refund in the first 10 days after receive the check, which means, yes, it's not enough to stimulate the economy with a one-time refund check. It's not even close to kind of jumpstart the economy. Um, so what's the best way of us, allocating the fiscal stimulus? It's a tough question. It's a political question as well. And I can hear the arguments on one side are saying you want to save the jobs, which means you have to provide support to small business and large business altogether. And this way that less, I mean, like a fewer people are laid off and more people will continue to receive a paycheck. And when we are out of this public health crisis, and they will have a jobs to go to. Because the economy is not like a small engine where you can just cut off the oil and restart it and it will start right away. Because when the business went under, and it takes a whole lot more to restart. So that's why I think quite a bit of the funds actually going to business, going to places you would think that they are loaded with cash. And pick a couple industries, airlines. I think airlines are one of those industries are basically running on debt. And so they borrow money just to operate. And when there's a liquidity constraint like we're experiencing now, people are now buying air tickets, and they actually at the verge of a bankruptcy if don't have any income. And so, do we want to save them, or just we want to see and kind of go under their own weight? I think that's a debate on different aspects, because when those airlines are gone, and there will be um, jobs that will go with them, and which probably will take a whole lot more money to revive that industry following the end of this public health crisis. And I think several you know agencies like CBO, they had some rough estimate about the cost associated with you know a, a different industry sector suffering some sort of a wave of a bankruptcy, and how much money it will cost the society. Um, I think I think there's no perfect answer in terms of the timing of the recovery. Yes, giving the checks to the people who need the money the most is the quickest way, but it's probably not going to be enough to jumpstart the economy when people are not spending the money on to kind of make the money have bigger impact through the circulation, through this ripple effect, across the different sectors of the economy. Yeah, it's tough. I think on one hand, lots of people need help. On the other hand, if their business, their companies are out of business and those jobs are not coming back anytime soon, and we're just in a really a downward kind of spiral, and so that probably going to be a bigger dollar sign price tag associated with that kind of outcome. I think what we are doing now is a little bit both, and but in terms of what's the optimal strategy, and people I guess are also thinking about the political impact of that. I think that's out of the realm of an economist because every time when some people are hurt from the policy, and you really have to put a some sort of a some sort of a relative weighting on different sectors of the economy, and that's where it gets political, and that oftentimes is throwing every economic principle out the window when that occurred.
Awesome. We have another question about the retail sales numbers that you displayed. So, could the reduction in retail sales result in less imports and, in turn, create international tension?
Yeah, I think it depends on which sectors we're talking about. I think there actually is a surge in imports in several sectors, including the PPEs and the public health related items in late February and then March. But I think, yeah, overall that we are importing less because people are spending less time, less money purchasing on those items. So we see basically a double whammy. So we have a reduction on demand for the items, for the merchandise. We also see a disruption of supply chains across the globe. So even if we wanted certain items in certain volumes, we're not there. The exports, they are unable to supply those items either because the commercial flights are down, the logistics are broken up, and in some cases, it's the reduction of both supply and demand. In some cases, it's just there is a breakdown of transports. And we already seen some flare-ups in terms of trade tension. So we just saw this morning that there are some tariff disputes between China and Australia, and we might see more. And I guess when the economy is in stress and when politics are involved, we're going to see some of those disputes. But I think the large disruption is the global supply chain, the down of consumer demand, and the disruption of transport. I think that has a bigger toll on the disruption of international trade than the trade balance and then trade policy at this point. Maybe we will see some new dynamics coming out of this crisis, given that different countries have a different recovery speeds. And I think it's a good time uh, for people to study economics because, again, I think we are throwing every textbook out the window when we are seeing the shock to the labor market, the shock to the financial market, and unprecedented policy introduced to every entity on this world economy. And it just every day with new data comes in and we're learning something new. Um, Economists are bad at making forecasts, but I think this is a error where we just have to open our eyes and we have to be open-minded. We really have to listen to data. Um, but yeah, it's a scary and it's exciting at the same time I don't know if that captures the my sentiment concerning many kind of different fronts of on this event.
Excellent. So we are barreling in on 2 o'clock here. So I will open it up if there's one more question out there that hasn't been submitted through the chat that anybody was wanting to ask. Awesome. Well, I've got one last one for you. In your estimation, which sectors of the economy are likely to recover the fastest, and which might recover more slowly?
Well, if I'm speaking on my personal preference, I think it's the food industry, right? Now, I know many neighbors in my community are eager to have some fine dining when we come out of this lockdown. But yeah, I think retail service sectors are the quickest to recover based on the historic observations. I think manufacturing is going to be slow. Energy sector is going to be slow. Um, it just, I think that's some are just the nature of the business. Some are just the consumer behavior.
Gotcha. We got a hot potato. You don't have to answer this one, but so now that COVID-19 is hitting the upper class, is that the rush to reopen?
You mean reopen as a state or as a community?
I think as the states are looking to reopen what they have going on, reopen stores and public facilities, those kind of things.
Yeah, I think some aspects of our life is slowly opening up, and I think we need to again put our ears on the ground and listen to the data, listen to the public health experts. I think we are staying home at the beginning of this pandemic simply because we want to flatten the curve, which means we want to save our medical resources for the critically ill patients, and we don't rush the hospital. We don't exhaust our resources. I think we somewhat kind of achieved that initial goal in terms of flattening the curve. Of course, we haven't really crossed the curve. We haven't really get to the place where we have no new cases for 2 cycles of this infectious disease. But again, and I think the long term impact of the pause of the economy is also very detrimental. I think it's a tricky balance of the two. We want to be safe, and then we also want to slowly assess the progress we're making in terms of a reopening the economy. I think what's fortunate for us is that we're not the only states that had to deal with this constant assessment, evaluation of our reopening process. There are hard hit states like New York, Washington, and they will be kind of the front runner in terms of experimenting with their policies. But of course, North Carolina has its own characteristics. I believe some well-planned, methodical, data-driven decisions are the key and to resuming our economic activities. And I'm very thankful this last week, um, you know, uh, we went to a local state park and it was opened um, and barely any people there. So I think you can pretty much keep your social distancing that way. But you have a change of the scenery and you let your kids run some energy. Um, I think stuff like that can definitely be okay to reopening. Also, as we are getting more data about slowly opening retail, food industry, even schools, and maybe we'll have a better decision in terms of what's going to be the capacity of a room, what's going to be a safe level of kind of maybe a staggering pattern of opening certain kind of levels of business or educational institution. And if we never collect that data at a large, like a smaller scale, we're probably never going to have a successful reopening sequence for the larger scale. So I think, yeah, I would just take it slow and constantly following the data, and we will get there. I'm confident that we will be back.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I want to wrap us up and make sure you're able to get out of here. Normally, if we were doing this event, if we were doing this yet a year ago or a year from now, we'd be in person somewhere maybe, and then enjoy some appetizers and drinks afterwards, and mingle and chat. And so I'll close out the program, and if anyone wants to stick around in this room and do so, I'm happy to do that. But want to make sure we wrap up this portion and stop recording. We don't need to record us hanging out chopping it up. So I really do appreciate you all joining us. And thank you to Dr. Liu for your time and sharing your gifts with us. It's quite a topic, and the conversation will be ongoing for sure. Thank you again for checking in. If you want to learn more about the Thomas Harriot College of Arts and Sciences or the Department of Economics, I'm placing those links in the chat feed for your reference. We hope you'll continue to be engaged with us both in this time of the coronavirus and well afterwards. To learn more about the Alumni Association and what we do, go to piratealumni.com. We have a ton of virtual resources out there for this time. Please visit and take a look at other items of interest. The association functions based on gifts from our donors, so if you are inclined to do so, please consider a gift to the Alumni Association commensurate with your ability to give and passion. They are all certainly very appreciated. Keep an eye on our social media outlets as we have career expert panels coming up each Tuesday, and Dr. Heather Littleton will be joining us Thursday, May 28th to talk about coping with uncertainty, a topic we could all probably benefit from right now. So until then, thanks for joining us, and talk soon. I will stick around until folks want to leave. I'm going to try to do the networking happy hour hangout afterwards thing virtually here and see how that goes. But otherwise, thank you so much for attending, and go Pirates.
Thank you.
I'm gonna